friends joining us.
Welcome, Internet.
Hey, welcome to the season finale of season zero of Stay and Go.
Come
Uh,
on.
we cheated and skipped the last one. We skipped live stream the last one because it got fairly intensely personal, but it was really good. I think just as a recap, I think we were both dealing with fairly emotional issues, professionally bleeding into personal, that this like using this framework to help us talk through what we were feeling and experiencing was very cathartic for me in having language to frame it. And I was reflecting even today that I have the notes there and the whiteboard. I want to clean that up or something, right? Where we have this sort of U-shaped thing as we start with this external situation, like this is an intolerable external situation. And it's like, oh, the reason it's intolerable is because it's carrying this internal tension that I would rather not have to admit exists. I would rather be able to want to release that tension onto someone else. And this, embracing that journey and moving towards the internal resolution. It's like, okay, I have a way to reframe my identity to anchor on something different so that I can uh, add an extra degree of freedom, which allows me to re-engage with the external situation in a way that may not quote unquote solve the problem, but it releases where it was stuck so we can move forward. And that's a at least that's my sort of uh, take on how I've been experiencing this. You're muted.
It's definitely a reframing tool, which I like that language you're using, reframing. I recently had a conversation with our mutual friend Joel and took him through this story process, and he actually had a very interesting take on it. He said it's a "you are here" tool, and
Mm,
you go to the mall and you walk in and you say, "Okay, this thing has got 20 entrances and all these stores, and it's kind of hard to figure out." Which direction I'm looking and where to go to get to the place I want to go to. And you got this map there, and it's a map of the mall, and there's this little, red circle that says you are here. And he said, what you're doing with this story process is you're helping people see where they are and understand how to orient around their current place and figure out what their next step is towards where they want to end up. And, I felt like the reframing is another way of saying that it helps you understand why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? What is the point of progress? And, for your situation last time, it was external circumstances, relationships, people that were creating for you tension, it seemed. But as we, reframed it and we're curious, we could see, okay, that tension actually exists in me. And by seeing that correctly, I'm no longer coming to the situation saying, okay, this is outside of my control. I have no way of interacting with it other than, just this is everyone else but me. The ability to say, oh, I'm going to reframe this internally, understand it correctly. It helps me both in a broader sense with your life and in a specific sense, reframe and get better perspective on how to respond internally and how to respond externally.
yeah. What's interesting, the emotion that came up, not one we talked a lot about, was hate. It's that like I hate this circumstance, or even that I hate, or I may pretty that up as despise, or even more euphemistically disagree with. It's like, but this is intolerable. This is the thing that must not be allowed to exist. And that's the underlying, not always conscious tension is that like, I cannot, and I think it's I guess the way I would frame that is that the external reality is not compatible with my ego identity. Like I cannot survive in this world. And having to acknowledge that the world is what it is, and it's okay that the world is the way it is intolerable. And but yet that is precisely the reframing of, oh yeah, it's my fractured, wounded, broken ego that is being exposed by these intolerable circumstances, and being willing to go on that inner journey to find a different way of engaging with reality so that you can accept that reality is what it is now, but then there is a path for it to become different. And I was literally going through that this week too, and I was feeling this. It's interesting, and maybe this is helpful and relevant. I do want to get into the wrap up and where you're going with your business. I don't want to go too deep on this, but um, I've been really convicted about anger in that when I see something wrong in the world, my goal is to maximize my sense of agency in the world so I can help things get better. And the easiest way to do that is with anger. It's just like, oh, rather than feeling demoralized and victimized, I just get angry and I get busy and I think hard and work hard and sometimes even pray hard to, fix things. But what I was realizing is that I guess the biblical verse is that the anger of man does not bring about the righteousness of God. And realizing that I have to let go of my anger. And when I let go of the anger, all these other emotions came up that were deeply uncomfortable and I wanted to run away from. And so having to sit there this week, and I think even this morning as I was reflecting on the journey I'm still in, is that, going back to that, I have a GPS in the mall. It's like, it's one thing to feel horrible. It's nothing to not know why you feel horrible. And to say like, hey, it's all part of the plan, right? This is the way that we grow up, is by facing these intolerable situations, and rather than curling up into a ball and dying or going on a rampage, there's a third way, a third dimension, if you will, that we can step out of, maybe even a fourth or a fifth dimension. I don't know. Yep.
I think what you're looking at there is uh understanding that we've kind of gotten a little bit of progress in this season of clarifying what this tool is and what it's useful for. And I've actually been working since our last time together on narrowing this down into an online course and into a clear
Ooh,
process. And I'm just in the writing stage of it. It's not yet online, but I've come up with a series of steps that maybe we can look at, and I
yeah.
think that they maybe match what the steps you took. Maybe we'll see. Maybe the steps aren't complete, or but let's look at them. I'm going to share my screen here.
Let's just do the framing first, though. It sounds like the one concrete outcome of this season, and maybe if not the thing that you're going to start building your business around, is this idea of an online course.
Yeah, so I mean that's helpful to think about what I'm planning on doing. This is I'm trying to remember what I've shared, but let's just give a big picture where I'm at now.
It's the
Uh
season finale. Do the wrap of where we are. Yeah.
yes. And what's brilliant about this actually is I just looking at our V2 mom, and what's written on there. It's funny once you're clear on something that you forget where that clarity came from. And I think there's been lots of revelations that have built up to this moment of clarity. But this what it's come to a place of representing for me is a ministry, in other words, a nonprofit service, and a business or a for-profit service. And I think the nonprofit service is offering these methods that help people understand their own personal story, reframe it, have tools to look at it. And that blends into and fits into a business where people can say, I want to do this with my business. I want to reframe my business, tell my business's story. And basically, the business is where I can come in and help you look at how these principles relate in a business setting to you more effectively branding, marketing, selling, communicating in the mission that God's given your business or that you have in your business. So that's the broader strokes of this, but the front end of it is this process that helps people find peace and find purpose. And I'm actually my latest iteration of this, and I don't know if this is where it'll end up, is actually two processes, one that helps you find peace and the other one that helps you find purpose. And they're related. And even the one that I took you through, Ernie, was a blend of the two, but I've started to look at maybe the first one is peace and the second one is purpose, and there can be a connection, but they're not tied together as heavily as they were. So let me share my screen here. Um, so what I have is this process. I don't know for sure what I'll name it, maybe the story process, but the objective for this course is to help you see your story so that you can take a better next step towards peace. So the goal of this course is to help you come to a place of peace. And the way you're going to get there is by seeing your story, by seeing what's going on with this sort of you are here reality of like, okay, where am I at? Let me orient around this. If the story is sort of a timeline, where are you at on that timeline? And based on where you are on that timeline, we're going to have some different steps to go forward. So the first step that I have is understand tension as story potential. And this idea that story is tension and resolution. When you have tension in your life, it just feels like tension. It doesn't feel like a story, and it isn't a story yet. It's the reality that that tension, like by its own definition of being tension, it's the reason it's tension is because it's not meant to be that way and it can be resolved. There's actually an expression of hope in that, that when you start to look at your life, you start to see the tension in your life as story potential. And this is a reframing. This is you looking at this situation's not ideal with my relationships. This situation's not ideal with my work, whatever it is, and say, how do I reframe this as potential for a story, as potential that there's meaning here? And so that's the first step. The second step is to name and order your inner and outer tension. And the idea here is differentiating, okay, externally, I feel, using my own journey, I can relate to the anger, I can relate to the loneliness. That's what I'm feeling on the outside. And it's because of this kid not doing what I want them to do, or my wife not understanding me. And then I can actually say, well, the internal tension is that I don't feel loved and accepted, or I don't feel heard and validated. And so I can actually name those two tensions, and then I can order them. I can say the internal tension of me not knowing that my voice is heard, not feeling like I'm heard, I'm valued, leads to this external anger when I don't feel heard and valued by someone in particular. And to order them gives you the ability to kind of say this one and this one are connected, but the inner tension is expressed in this outer tension, but it's separate from it and it comes before it, which essentially means I'm no longer a victim of my circumstances where my state is dependent on other people and other situations, but my state's actually internalized and separated, where I can actually know that I'm important and valuable to God, for example, and then recognize the situation where that isn't shown and say, okay, I have to interact with this situation, but I can do it from this place of knowing I'm accepted internally or resolved internally. So that's name and order your inner tension. Report your tension meds is just reflecting on, what do I do when I feel this tension? Do I escape? Do I deny that it exists? Do I start scrolling on social media? Do I run away from the circumstance? Whatever we're doing, we need to start to reflect on that and see that, because that's what's stopping us from this next step, paying attention to the tension. And when you start to pay attention to the tension, you're no longer stuffing it, pushing it away. You're now starting to say, I'm curious about this. Why do I feel this way? What's going on? You start to like get reflective on your tension, as opposed to avoidant or blaming or creating some way to deal with your external circumstance without having to look into the internal tension. And once you start paying attention to the tension, then you start to understand, oh, I have contradictory beliefs here. I have two beliefs that I'm holding on to. For me, it was that that I'm valuable as a person, was one belief. And the other belief is that I'm valuable because I can accomplish things. And so when those two beliefs come in tension with each other, I'm now no longer able to feel valuable as a person because I don't feel like I've accomplished enough. And I believe that my value comes from accomplishment. I'm now in tension internally because I can't operate from a place of knowing my own value because I'm still trying to prove it. I have to get curious. I have to pay attention to the tension, get to that place of clarity of seeing those two beliefs, and then realize I have to pick between the two. I can't both believe I have internal value and believe my value comes from what I do. Those are two separate beliefs that are incompatible. And so I can now start to think clearly about them and come back to my circumstances, come back to my internal world, deciding which of those two beliefs I want to pick. So that's my current process for this online course, and curious if you can see your own journey in it, or what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I thought that's a really good progression. And what's interesting to me is that the hard part is actually the zeroth one, which is that even using the word tension is a challenge, right? Is that, and when I've tried to do versions of this with people, the hard part is they just want to talk about the problem out there in the world. Like, this sucks. This happened. These people did that. And there is no tension. There is just like hatred, or for lack of a better term, right? And so there is a um, willingness to even um, go from the sort of unipolar view of reality to a bipolar, dualistic world, that there is a tension that I think should not be understated, the difficulty of that.
So it's a very good point you bring up, and I would suggest where I currently stand on this, and maybe it needs to be adapted to better suit this, is that this tool is better as a non-reactive tool. And so if you have like someone who's elevated in a situation and you bring them into this process, their um their setup in that situation is going to be preventative to them actually seeing this process as valuable and engaging it rightly. What you did that was different than that is you actually went through this process separate from a circumstance and situation, and you recognized the value in it and you saw better yourself in it. And it gave you some understanding of this is a tool to help me reframe. And it was coming back into that place when you were in a heated moment that enabled you to say, wait a minute, I'm going to try and cool down for a second, and I'm going to try and use this process from this heated moment because I have a positive belief or a positive feeling about this tool. Introducing that tool in the heated moment is a different situation because you're coming in with all of these fight or flight mechanisms being activated. And so, if I come to, for example, my wife and say, let's talk about these parenting issues that we're having, I'm saying, bring up all your emotions, bring up all of your history, bring up all of this stuff that's going on, and let's now talk about that. I'm actually presenting the opportunity for her to feel a lot of things and to present those feelings in a negative way or a challenging way to progress. This situation, this setup is more set up to say, let's just sit down as an exercise outside of any circumstance and go there. And as we do that, we come at maybe potentially the same problems, but not from the external, but from the internal. And so I think the issue maybe that you're running into is that this tool isn't meant to be a reactive tool. It's meant to be a tool that's introduced outside of a situation or stimulus. Once it's introduced, it could be used as you've done, but I don't think it's the starting point.
Right. Well, let me reframe that as the marketing challenge, right? If people are
Okay.
already at a place of peace, then they don't need your tool, right? So the question is what is the level of emotional discomfort that you are targeting?
So what I would probably where I would enter the marketing conversation is actually around your tension meds. Um, so you are aware of the fact that you are dealing with a social media addiction, or that you're dealing with whenever a relationship gets difficult, you escape. The reality of your tension meds or the things that you're doing in your life that you find unhealthy and that you find unproductive and they're causing you to be stuck. I'm doing this thing over and over again that I don't want to do. Another way to say this is my actions don't match my beliefs. And so if you can start in the space of saying, is there an area of your life where your actions don't match your beliefs, your stated beliefs, or where you have an addiction, or where you are zoning out or disengaging from relationship, from whatever it is, that reality is something that's very common and familiar to people, and it's a clue to indicate to them you have some internal unresolved tension. Um, from that place, the issue is that if we go to the externals first and we start saying, "Tell me about a circumstance where you get triggered," we're going to get that person in a state where they're going to want to fight or flee, and they get more aggressive. But if we can get them curious from, I'm addicted to social media, let me get curious about it. Now I'm starting to realize something internally that's going on in me. Oh, wait a minute. I actually recognize that internal reality leaking in my externals in this way. That's kind of the way I would approach it.
Okay, interesting. That's a very different framing than I was coming from, but it feels like a plausible strategy, right? I mean, I think technically the term is disgust, is that like I do this thing that I'm disgusted by, or that I wish was and in the sense of there's a thing that I see myself doing that I wish was not part of me, right? I wish I didn't act like that in those circumstances. And that could be sort of a private acting out. It could also be a public acting out, right? That I didn't that when I had this Thanksgiving dinner with somebody, I or my spouse objected to my behavior, and I feel that there's something there. And I think that's a plausible emotion to start with. And I think being clear on which emotion you're starting from is a good part of the marketing.
Yeah, that's a curious. I don't actually know what the marketing is going to look like in this, but I think for me, I don't know these are the words I would use in a marketing sense, but they're clear words. Is that I'm helping people who are not feeling at peace, and I'm helping people who are struggling with what their purpose is. And to me, those are intrinsically connected. The reality is you're not at peace because you're not resolved in your internal tension. And just being aware of that, the you are here mechanism is what my process is meant to do, which enables you to see more information as to why I'm not at peace and to understand your lack of peace. Joel suggested, and I think this is probably a good direction, is I'm not actually resolving things for people. I might give them some tools. I might say, here's a
Yeah,
process. Joel has a process called Freedom for the Willing, where it's like, okay, I've identified that I believe this lie or that I have this tension. Why? And how do I get out of that? His process could get you out of that if that's where you're stuck. My process just helps you see it. So that struggle to get peace is kind of maybe the driver for people to this process. But the other piece of it is I'm trying to figure out what my purpose is, and most people they're trying to figure out their purposes so that they can be at peace. And that's using the external to resolve the internal. Instead, saying, let's get you at peace and then understand how once you're in a place of peace, you can now come back to the purpose conversation. One, not trying to find purpose so that you can be at peace, which enables you to have clearer eyes. And then two, once you understand the story of your tension and the story of what brought you to peace, it is tied to and connected to in many ways your purpose. And so you can actually spring forth from this journey to get peace and say, I'm going to help other people find peace in a similar way. Whether that's directly, like you're actually going to help coach other people, or if it's just more tied to, in an external sense, the type of work you do, which I'm working with several businesses right now that, I've got a buddy who has a chimney company, and working through this internal story process with him on his personal story, we realized it ties perfectly with his chimney company, and it ties he already knows his purpose in that regard. This process actually connects for him and helps him engage his chimney business with a broader understanding of what he's doing and how it connects to his story. So I think it's peace and purpose that I'm trying to draw people to. And I think those are things that right now people, they struggle with anxiety, they struggle with depression, they struggle with feeling lost, not knowing their identity. Those are peace and purpose questions.
right. But I want to drill in on that because I think like the course as it is looks fine, right? The really interesting question for me is I guess pushing to be more precise about the actual emotion. Like an absence of peace can come from a wide variety of different emotions. I could be really angry. I could be really depressed. I could be, really lonely. Like there's lots of things. But the emotion that I heard you zoning in on was what I would label self-disgust. My actions don't match my beliefs. I'm not saying that's the only one, but at least understanding that that is one of the ones that you are centering your approach on.
Yeah, I don't know. You might be right that I need to pick an emotion to work off of. I think of anger as powerful sadness, controlling sadness. And so anger says there's something wrong and I care. And so you get angry because something's not working and you care. Sadness is the same thing. There's something wrong and I care. That makes me sad. Disgust could be described in the same way internally. There's something that's wrong and I care. So to me, it's more this recognition of this dissonance. You might be right that I need to focus in some marketing effort to maybe one ad or one post or one video that I make is why you are frustrated with your own lack of discipline or your own lack of consistency or why you don't do what you say you believe. Another, I think lead into this course could be what your anger says about your internal state and how to make progress forward in it. To me, all these emotions lead into this process.
Right.
It's just a
But you
question
just
of,
but you just said at the beginning, like, I'm not designing this for people who are really angry at the external world in an elevated state of outrage. You kind of said you didn't want to deal with that at that level.
okay, so well, what I'm thinking is, and maybe this is just getting more information from what you're saying. It sounds like you were trying to take someone into this situation. What I'm saying is, if you're going to use this process on a friend, the question is, where's your starting point? And if your starting point is them saying, I'm really frustrated by this situation in my business or in my marriage, and you say, I've got a process for you, um, it may not go as well because they're starting from the externals, and this is about getting curious about the internals. So,
Right. And that was my point, is that just saying you don't have peace is not an appropriate filter for your process. Because there's lots of reasons people could be in a place where they don't have peace and they're really angry about the outside world, and that's all that they can see. And you're saying, okay, this is not the process for the person in that state. Or at least that's not what I'm currently designing the process for.
well, there is in my communication, some inherent beliefs that I'm assuming. And for example, one of those beliefs is that your problems are connected to you. And, I think in our current world, that's a statement of belief that many people wouldn't agree with. I think there's a whole nother belief system that my problems are outside of me. And, if you're going to go into broader worldviews, we're talking about, a Christian worldview versus a Marxist worldview. Is the problem internal or external? And so, yeah, there's to some degree, there's an incompatibility issue if someone comes in and says, I've got problems outside of me and I'm trying to figure out how to solve them, and they're not me at all, then it doesn't really matter where you start with them, that there's an incompatibility in their beliefs.
So I feel like I'm trying to say something that you're not hearing. So let me take a
Sorry, I'll
moment.
try and listen better.
No, no, I'm not saying that. Let's just take a moment, right?
Okay.
I feel like I'm trying to offer a helpful clarification that would be useful information for you to plan what you're going to do.
Okay.
And I don't think you're hearing it that way. I think you're hearing it like a critique.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's the case, but that's my hypothesis. What are you
Is it
feeling at the moment?
is it possible that I'm focused on what I'm doing, and you've shifted in this conversation to how am I going to market it? Um, and so
What,
there's a question of what's inside the can, and there's a question of what's the label on the can. And so you're saying something, and I'm responding to, well, this is what is in the can. and this is what, is in this process, what can be done with it. And you're saying, well, how is someone else going to see it and approach it?
Right. And my point, yeah, and I think that's my point is that like I think what's in the can is fine, right? And but you're defining the can in a certain way, right? And when you throw the label on it of, oh, you don't have peace, I think that's a unhelpful label. It's like a can labeled fruit,
I would
right?
say maybe what's being stirred up in me is I don't even know if I'm yet thinking about what's the label on the can. So if I'm talking to that point, it's more from, well, here's why what's inside the can is valuable or helpful or useful. I don't really know if I've actually shifted in my brain to say, how am I going to sell this product? Like I don't even think I've really worked on that yet. I'm just currently in the state of how do I have a valuable product? Um,
Okay.
Shifting to selling that product is an important shift that I'll need to get to, but I'm not there yet. But I think I'm just dynamically responding,
No,
to what you're saying, but you're kind of in a marketing question and I'm more in
there,
the
there's okay. Let me take a moment, see if I can rephrase my feedback.
okay.
So this is just an observation.
Okay.
Okay, it's not something requiring you to take action. Is that it appears to me that the way you've designed this process is making an implicit assumption about the kind of people who are showing up to engage in this process. And my hypothesis is that I think the assumption that you are making is that people have this emotion of a disconnect between the way they act and the way they like to think about themselves in terms of their values. And I think that's a powerful emotion. I think that the label for that is plausibly self-disgust. And I think, and my point is that for the future, understanding the not just an generic absence of peace, but the precise active emotions and, which could be more than one. But what is the emotion that they are feeling that is energizing them to take action will be very important. And so that was just the observation.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. And something interesting about self-disgust is inherent in it is um this awareness of I have a problem, which seems to be a prerequisite to this struggle is like the problem's not just outside of me. That would be disgust in a general sense or external disgust. Self-disgust would be saying, I don't like myself. There's something about me that I don't like. There's something about me that I don't appreciate. And I think in a sense, in that way, um, that might be the right condition that someone needs to be in to get to this course and use it. Because if it was like, I'm angry, but it's about something outside of me, then that when you get into the course, it's just like, this isn't going to work.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was just trying to give you some observations and handles for when you get around to that. But just realizing that you're already making assumptions as you design this, and the more you can be explicit about them and intentional. And the other point that I also think is the meta point, which I think you understand, but I find a lot of people uh, gloss over this, is you need people to be emotionally engaged, to make a buying decision, right? They have to feel something that makes them want to get over the activation energy to do something. And you have to understand what is it that people already feel and are consciously aware that they feel who will find you, right? And then also whether people are feeling this, but they don't have language for it. And so therefore they aren't consciously thinking around it. And so that's step zero of trying to find the people who fit this psychographic profile and then connect with them in a way that their emotional state translates into some level of conscious awareness of what you're doing is a huge challenge. And ad hoc personal relationships, it's a lot easier because you know all the context. Um, and maybe that's a marketing discussion for a later time of how do you gain that context either through you could have a virtual online thing where it's still based on people you have a relational connection to, right? And that's in fact probably your first cohort would be that. um,
Totally. Well, I think it's, there's a necessary, I would say necessary reality in any business that the strongest, or at least the most, there needs to be a strong presence of word of mouth, because what you need is an indication that this product is good enough that someone would share it with somebody else. If a friend will share it with a friend, then it's more likely to think that a stranger might share it with their friend.
yeah.
So, I think in this process, the way I envision it is still kind of in this classic, I guess they're in the online marketing of it, like you don't need a gatekeeper or a friend or an access to a community, but I still think of it in that terms of, I'm finding groups in person who are willing to say, I'm going to take my youth group through this or take my class of students through this. That there's a trust or a value that the person that has that authority to make that decision has in this process, that it's worked for them on some level.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let me reflect on that for a moment. um, I mean, it's an interesting hypothesis and it could work, right? The thing that is, this is just an observation, is that I was already thinking that if you want populations who have a high level of self-disgust, it's easier to find that in religious communities. Even if they're not theologically religious, but people who like, whether that's woke or whether that's rationalist, people who have a really strong standard that they measure themselves against are more likely to feel self-disgust. I mean, everyone feels something, but some people only feel self-disgust in sort of extreme social reactions, right? And we have recovery groups for people like that, right? But finding these sort of milder levels of self-disgust is in these sorts of um, the original term of the word religious, people who live by a rule, right? And the challenge, of course, or at least this is a wonder I have, is that the people who are the authority figures who could bring in a group are often the personification of the self-disgust, right? I have a priest whose job it is to tell me what's wrong with me. And having them enter into the situation with me, it would be potentially a conflict of interest. I'm not sure. So I'm curious how that will work out, right? Having someone refer someone that they can't deal with to you, I could see them being totally on board with. But leading a group through it could be very interesting. I don't know how that would play out.
Well, my hope would be that the priests would have experienced it on some level because of a word of mouth or relational connection, and they said, wow, this was helpful to me. Is essentially what we've got going on in our world. It's interesting we're talking about disgust so much on this episode, is we have people that are saying, I am disgusted with myself, I accept that I'm wrong, and then we have a new reaction that now says, I don't care what standards, I don't have a standard, my standard is whatever makes me feel right, whatever makes me feel good. It's essentially I'm not going to be disgusted with myself. I'm going to accept myself and love
Yeah.
myself as the solution to maybe an upbringing of self-disgust. And then you've got people who say, well, I don't want to be self-disgusted, but I also still believe that there are some rules or some system. And I think that's kind of even the people that have moved on from the self-disgust, they're discovering I can't fully escape it. I still am disgusted by, maybe they've left religious rules and now they find themselves in woke rules where they're saying, I need to, police people based on how they respond to other people and whether they do a good job of that or not. So we're having a hard time escaping rules and saying I can just be totally free. I think there are some people maybe that have really achieved, and maybe this is a personality thing, a sense of peace by not caring or by not having any rules. But I think, there's there's definitely groups out there of people who say, let's say it's a priest, or let's say it's the person in his parish, I'm using Catholic language even though I'm a Protestant, um, that the priest says, I also don't like the self-disgust, and I'm looking for freedom from the self-disgust. And I don't think that means I need to throw off all the rules or that I don't have any rules, but I still would like a different approach than just beat myself up and try harder, be better. And I want to get curious about what's going on inside of me. That would be the perfect person for this sort of situation, is someone who's believes there's some reason behind it that they can sort out and work towards, or hears about that reason and thinks, maybe there is, I'd like to go try and see. To me, it's not the big bad wolf is the pastor or the priest or the religious leader. I think that we're all wrestling with these realities, and what we found in religious communities is that maybe if I just preach at you and explain to the wrong theology you have and why you shouldn't be doing this thing, that maybe you'll just start doing it better. And I think this approach that we're taking is completely different, that the pathway to change comes through self-discovery and change of beliefs, not through willpower and guilt and self-disgust.
No, I totally agree that it would make sense. My hypothesis, which is different than yours, or my wonder, is that the very dynamics that put someone in that role feels to me like they would that this is the thing, and I'm going through this in some context now, is that the very thing that makes these people effective in their role is their inability to succumb to awareness of self-disgust. And when you're an authority figure, I mean, being a dad, right? To the extent I had
Inability
that
to
role,
succumb to self-disgust.
yeah, is that I don't let myself uh, express that level of doubt and vulnerability to the people who are following me. And it's just a hypothesis. And if you could prove me wrong, that would be awesome. But
Well,
it's like, yeah,
that brings up a reflection in me. I went through this process recently with someone who is closer to my dad's age. He's kind of in between me and my dad's age. But coming into that context, and I don't know if there could have been other reasons that it didn't make sense to him. But my sense coming out of that is that this is going to be approached differently by different generations. And so what I am hypothesizing to you is that we have an older generation that essentially does not live in a state of lack of peace, that they've actually figured out, how do I make peace with my circumstances by stating my beliefs, forcing my actions, being the person that I say I'm going to be. And there's a bunch of people that have somewhat succeeded in that place. And when you come in and say, let's talk about your internal tension, it's like, I'm good. Like, I don't have any internal tension. I've resolved that. And that actually is the problem that generation has brought to the next generation, of saying, don't worry about what you feel. Don't worry about what's going on inside of you. Just decide what you believe and do it. And in that is your peace. And the millennial generation has said, that's not working for me. Like, I'm struggling here. And in that state, we're now developing this internal tension of, okay, I think this is what I want to be on the outside, but I'm not. What do I do with that? And the older generation's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, you're just being emotional and weird, and you just need to suck it up and do the right thing. I think it's a generational gap. And the only ones that I've seen in the older generation that get it are the ones that, have hit some sort of bump in the road or some sort of thing that's caused them to actually realize, oh, you know what, this theoretical, I'll just accept my actions and do it, it isn't working for some reason. And they become sympathetic to, what the millennial is by default starting with. And this is broad strokes, obviously. There are always exceptions, but
right. So this is an interesting insight, is that you live in a milieu where the cultural norm among your generation is to verbally acknowledge this sense of a lack of peace. And possibly even in a way that is consistent with an underlying sense of self-disgust. Right. And that's why I think about this. This is why I prefer the term psychographic versus demographic, because I'm pretty sure I'm older than whoever it was that you talked to.
probably.
despite my youthful good looks. And so it's really a question of context and framing. Because I know people like the guys at my church, when I get them in the right place of a conversation, they admit all these things, right? But it's not how they present in the outside world because they have a role they have to fit, right? Like, and so that's where I think that understanding the psychodynamics of who you are reaching and how will become really important. And I would urge you to not fall into demographic traps of this age group or this religion or whatever. The more you can understand the underlying psychographic, the more efficiently and expansively you can bring in the people. And it's always going to be, there'll be false positives and false negatives. Any marketing is imperfect. You'll bring in some people who you think are great that are going to not just thrash, and there'd be people that you've overlooked that actually would be perfect. And that's the whole, that's the next season maybe is now that we have like, and this is amazing. Like I glossed over the like, this is like the idea, like this is a course for people who fit a certain psychographic profile. They can come in and they're feeling anomie, I guess is the term. They feel bad about their current life or their current behavior, and they don't know why. And I think the "you are here" metaphor is like, hey, you're worried that there's something wrong with you, and you don't know what to do about it, and you either whine and complain about it, or you just try to ignore it, or you medicate it away. And it's like, hey, this thing that you thought was a problem is actually an extraordinary opportunity, right? So you
Yeah.
get to a whole new level of self-awareness, of peace, and effectiveness. And um, and I think, the idea of doing a class and piloting it and iterating on it, starting with people you already know and have connections to, I think that's a great uh, launching point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm I'm trying to think. We got 11 minutes here to wrap up this finale for the season. Um, I maybe would shift to just say thank you for the work that you've done with me on this process. It's been incredibly helpful. And, I think in this process, I've reflected on quite a bit and made a lot of progress on what is this ministry, Stay and Go, and what it has the potential of becoming. And I think I am on track to announce it in January. Whether or not I get a first iteration of this course up in January or not, I think that we're making good time and in a good position to actually offer something here that, yeah, will probably adjust and change. And I'm even imagining as I look at it saying, okay, you could present this differently in different circumstances, but we've got something here that actually could be iterated on, which I think is a massive win. And from the beginning of this, there was a lot of broad questions, and those questions have really helped shape what this has become.
yeah, so we haven't resolved it, but we need a word for this.
More
Uh,
awareness.
we have framed it. And there's a reframing, but there's also just a framing, right? You have all these pieces you've been sticking around, and the exercises and the documents we go through. I don't know if you're ever going to use them, but they've helped you in this framing process that you
Yes.
framed up, and now you have a framework and some concepts that you can then iterate on, and that is that's interesting. I often think about reframing. I don't often think about framing and taking people from a state of, well, I feel this and I want this, but I don't really have a framework, a frame to work. And to point out, like, yeah, I have a framework. I have a bunch of artifacts and documents and ideas and theories, and I'm pretty close to actually like pulling the trigger and doing something and seeing how it works. And like I always say, plans are useless, planning is invaluable. Or as plans are worthless, planning is priceless, right? Is that the reality will always surprise you. But if you have a plan, you have some mental frameworks. And even like when I was going through it this week, thinking like, okay, I just feel awful. I want to just self-medicate. It's like, okay, wait, maybe this is the thing that Philip was talking about. It's like, whoa, you didn't warn me how awful it feels to sit in that tension without my meds. That's one of the things that is now we have this artifact. And so the next round of people will at least have a chance to know that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And, I think it's encouraging to me that you are taking this process and using it outside of it being a sit down, let's do this even one-on-one, to do it internally or but with your alone. That willingness to reframe, be curious about your own experiences and circumstances, and even the clarity around that. Because like this is something that I've been doing for a while, this curiosity about myself, but the language of, oh, there's internal tension here. That internal tension has a lie underneath of it or a limiting belief. I've recently even changed it to say there's actually two beliefs. Maybe you can call it a truth and a lie. There's a lot of people out there that actually know the right answer. They just also don't believe it. They,
Hmm.
they have the answer and they have a counter answer to that or an argument with that. And you hold on to those two things. That's what's causing the tension.
So they have a true unbelief and an untrue belief.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. And those two things are in conflict and they can't just shake it. I think that's where you have someone that isn't disgusted with themselves is they've shaken it. Maybe they're like you have villains that are
Or
evil.
suppressed it.
They suppressed that feeling or they've moved on or they've numbed
Hmm.
it out or decided that it doesn't matter
Yeah,
anymore. Um, the ability to stop and say, oh, I feel something. I wonder why I feel this. And I'm not going to escape it. Like the pay attention to the tension is a novel idea because we're used to causing the tension to disappear. And
yeah,
so just the fact that you're start to feel uncomfortable, and instead of saying, I'm going to go find something to feel more comfortable, you say, why am I not feeling comfortable? What got me here? What's going on
yeah,
internally in me that's brought me here? That is because in the end, the goal is not for them to go through this process and come out of it saying, I now understand this issue in my life and I'm good. It's actually to teach them a new way to think and to look at their feelings and their heart and their story.
yeah. And this ties into a whole bunch of stuff around parts work and internal family systems about like there's a part of me that believes this is true, and that is not the part that is active when I'm, under stress. And, being curious about those parts is one of the dialogues I'm working through right
It
now.
it's the head heart reality. There are people out there that say, it really just comes down to logic and making the best decisions with no emotions. And the reality is, in the end, um, we can sort of say, this is the way I should be. This is the way I should live. This is what's right. But what do we do when we don't live that way? What do we do when we don't operate that way? And all of a sudden, we're now, if you follow that train of thought, left in this place where it's saying, I can't just make logical decisions disconnected from my what I feel, what I think, what I how I live. I actually have to marry the two. My head and my heart have to work together. I have to sort out, and the heart needs the head too. I mean, honestly, this whole process is a head process to understand the heart. So it's not like the point is stop thinking. It's how can you think in a way that supports your heart, is curious about it, draws it out so that it can find resolution, find peace, and come back to those beliefs you have with a shot of living them, not just in this state of forced willpower through threat of consequence, but actually this place of saying, oh, I believe this. I don't want to do this thing, but I'm going to choose to do what matches my beliefs out of belief, not out of guilt or out of
Out of
willpower.
grace rather than law. Yeah, out of freedom rather than obligation. Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole left brain, right brain dynamic there. But my point is that I've discovered that that's very fractal. Like there's different layers in that the alienation. That's where the whole internal parts work idea comes from. And then there's a whole dynamic there. So anyway, I think this and actually the law of grace is maybe a good place to end this, right? Is that when we feel this self-disgust, we have been conditioned to hate ourselves, as opposed to saying, like, no, this, and maybe that's the good news part, is that you see these behaviors and they're really driving you crazy because they're really embarrassing and awkward, and you kind of hate yourself when you do it. But to say, like, hey, these are actually clues from your subconscious about a way more powerful way of being in the world. I have this saying I've been using at my church is that we need religion to save us from the world, and then we need Christ to save us from religion. And in some ways, I think if we're starting with this emotion of self-disgust, there is a religion that people have that their super ego that they're judging themselves with. And it's like, hey, you needed that to get to where you are. That got you your community, your level of performance, whatever. But I just did a astronaut blog post with ChatGPT about it's like a booster rocket. Once you get out of the Earth's gravity well, that's just dead weight. You have to let go to be able to land on the moon, which is the life of the spirit and the life of grace.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, if you're watching this and I don't know if we have any live stream viewers today, but if you're watching this in 5 years and you're wondering, where did this go? What did this look like? You have the potential to go over and search Stay and Go and potentially find what we're talking about and maybe experience it. And maybe it'll have been iterated multiple times since then. But Ernie, I just want to say thank you to you. I really appreciate your time and I feel like you just have a gift to ask really good questions. I even remember one of our first meetings before this started, you asked me, I called myself a videographer and you said, where did you get that identity from? When did you start accepting that identity? And you were right to question that. And I've started to think of myself differently and talk about myself differently. And I just really appreciate what you bring to these conversations, different perspective and clarity of thought, and even hearing what I'm saying and saying it back to me. I just feel like you have an incredible gift in that, and I'm thankful for it.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is the end of season 0. I'm curious to see what you end up doing on your own, and maybe we'll do another season or at least like a bonus episode where we see what happens next.
Yeah, I'm totally down to jump in, and obviously we'll continue the conversation offline as well.
All right. God bless you. Merry Christmas. And I'm sure I'll see you on Friday morning one of these days.